Let's now look into the other part of the chapter of Glimpses of India, tea from Assam. Let's look into some information about the author for this part. Arup Kumar Datta is a writer and journalist from Assam. He has written numerous books for adults as well as children. Let's now look into the theme of the story. The story revolves around the tea plantations in Assam and the legends about how the ritual of drinking tea came into being. The very practice of drinking tea is extremely common and a part of a cultural habit in a place like India. Let's now look into a form of explanation for this part. Chai, garam chai. A vendor called out in a high pitched voice. He came up to their window and asked, Chai, saab? Give us 2 cups, Pranjal said. They sipped the steaming hot liquid. Almost everyone in their compartment was drinking tea too. Do you know that over 80 crore cups of tea are drunk every day throughout the world? Rajveer said. Wah! Exclaimed Pranjal. Tea really is very popular. The train pulled out of the station. Pranjal buried his nose in his detective book again. Rajveer too was an ardent fan of detective stories, but at the moment, he was keener on looking at the beautiful scenery. It was green everywhere. Rajveer had never seen so much greenery before. Then, the soft green paddy fields gave way to tea bushes. In this part, we come to know that the writer is talking about a journey in train where he encounters a conversation between two people who talk about certain facts that point to the popularity of tea in India. They are moving towards such a place where they see a lot of greenery and forest that eventually lead them to a scenic beauty of tea plantations and gardens. It was a magnificent view. Against the backdrop of densely wooded hills, a sea of tea bushes stretched as far as the eye could see. Dwarfing the tiny tea plants were tall, sturdy, shady shade trees, and amidst the orderly rows of bushes, busily moved doll like figures. In the distance was an ugly building with smoke billowing out of tall chimneys. Hey, a tea garden! Rajveer cried excitedly. Pranjal, who had been born and brought up on a plantation, didn't share Rajveer's excitement. Oh, this is tea country now, Pranjal said. Assam has the largest concentration of plantations in the world. You will see enough gardens to last you a lifetime. This part tells us about the vast expanse and stretch of tea bushes and gardens in a place like Assam. Assam, as a state, houses more than the world's entire population's consumption and growth of tea leaves. I have been reading as much as I could about tea, Rajveer said. No one really knows who discovered tea, but there are many legends. What legends? So it seems that nobody really knows the exact factual detail or information about the person who discovered tea. However, there continue to exist different legends that talk about and convey the message of the person who discovered tea. Well, there's the one about the Chinese emperor who always boiled water before drinking it. One day, a few leaves of the twigs burning under the pot fell into the water, giving it a delicious flavor. It is said they were tea leaves. So, the first legend that we see here is that of a Chinese emperor. He had the habit of boiling his water before drinking it. Accidentally, one day, the twigs that were around the pot which had the boiling water So, in the first part, we hear a legend of a Chinese emperor who had the habit of boiling water before drinking it. Accidentally, one day, there were twigs kept around the pot which was having the water boiling. Accidentally, as mentioned, those twigs fell into the pot gave the water that was being boiled a very delicious flavor. It is said that the delicious flavor of the twigs that fell into the pot was because they were the tea leaves. Tell me another, scoffed Pranjal. We have an Indian legend too. Bodhidharma, an ancient Buddhist ascetic, cut off his eyelids because he felt sleepy during meditations. 10 tea plants grew out of the eyelids. The leaves of these plants, when put in hot water and drunk, banished sleep. So it is said that the Indian version of the legend comes from a Buddhist ascetic who always felt extremely sleepy during his meditation time. As a result of this, he ended up cutting his eyelids, which then led to the growth of 10 tea plants from those eyelids. It is said that these leaves, when put in hot water and drunk, they usually prevent the person from feeling sleepy and banish sleep. Tea was first drunk in China, Rajveer added, as far back as 2700 BC, before Christ. In fact, words such as tea, chai, and chini are from Chinese. Tea came to Europe only in the 16th century and was drunk more as medicine than as beverage, which is quite a very interesting fact about the historical development and acceptance of tea. The train clattered into Mariani Junction. The boys collected their luggage and pushed their way to the crowded platform. Pranjal's parents were waiting for them. Soon they were driving towards Dekhiabadi, the tea garden managed by Pranjal's father. An hour later, the car veered sharply off the main road. They crossed a cattle bridge and entered Dekhiabadi Tea Estate. On both sides of the gravel road were acre upon acre of tea bushes, all neatly pruned to the same height. Groups of tea pluckers with bamboo baskets on their backs, wearing plastic aprons, were plucking the newly sprouted leaves. So, as it happened, Pranjal was in the vehicle with his parents who owned certain tea estates. As they were driving and crossed certain bridges, they came across a very extensive and vast span of tea estates. They were all cut with of a similar height and width, also making the view of the tea estates extremely pleasant and wonderful to look at. They also spotted a group of people who are called as the tea pluckers. Tea pluckers are individuals who are given the task of plucking tea leaves that are ready to be used. The tea pluckers often pluck the tea leaves and put it in a bamboo like basket that they carry on their backs. They also wear certain plastic aprons and pluck the newly sprouted leaves. Pranjal's father slowed down to allow a tractor pulling a trailer load of tea leaves to pass. This is the second flush or sprouting period, isn't it, Mr. Barua? Rajveer asked. It lasts from May to July and yields the best tea. So it isn't that tea gardens are always flushed with sprouted leaves that are ready to be plucked and used. There's a certain time period when the harvest or tea leaves is the best. It is usually from May to July that yields the best tea. You seem to have done your homework before coming, Pranjal's father said in surprise. Yes, Mr. Barua, Rajveer admitted, but I hope to learn much more while I'm here. So, Pranjal's father was extremely impressed by looking at the knowledge of the seasonal expansion and harvest of tea leaves that came from his son's friend Rajveer. However, despite knowing whatever Rajveer did, he also expected to learn a lot more while he was there at the tea estates. Let's now look into a quick revision for what we have learned and understood so far. This story covers the legends surrounding the habit of drinking tea. Tea is one of the most consumed beverages in India and around the world. The tea plantations of India are essential to our economy as India is one of the leading producers of tea in the world. The trees. Let's now look into what this section holds for us. The trees. Let's learn about the poet of the poem The Trees. Adrienne Rich was born in Baltimore, Maryland, United States of America in 1929. She is the author of nearly 20 volumes of poetry and has been called a feminist and a radical poet. Radical poets are people who use poems and their creative means and mechanisms to convey a certain point which is often political and quite extensive in nature. The trees. The trees inside are moving out into the forest. The forest that was empty all these days, where no bird could sit, no insect hide, no sun bury its feet in shadow, the forest that was empty all these nights will be full of trees by morning. All night the roots work to disengage themselves from the cracks in the veranda floor. The leaves strain toward the glass, small twigs stiff with exertion, long cramped boughs shuffling under the roof, like newly discharged patients, half dazed, moving to the clinic doors. I sit inside, doors open to the veranda, writing long letters, in which I scarcely mention the departure of the forest from the house. The night is fresh, the whole moon shines. In a sky still open, the smell of leaves and lichen still reaches like a voice into the rooms. My head is full of whispers, which tomorrow will be silent. Listen, the glass is breaking. The trees are stumbling forward into the night. Winds rush to meet them. The moon is broken like a mirror. Its pieces flash now in the crown, the tallest oak. Let's now look into the part explaining the poem, The Trees. In this poem, the poet gives us hope that the potted plants at home will move out where they truly belong, that is, into the forests and the natural habitat of greenery that has a very vast expansion and space. The animals and birds in the forest will be able to sit on their branches again. The theme of this poem is that human activities are creating a conflict between man and nature. The trees are not happy with human activities. As the world and the population of our country and the world is growing, it also leads the humans to indulge in certain activities for the benefit of themselves and their people. Often these activities depend on the nature, on natural resources. Humans, for their own benefit, go into the nature and harm the nature and extract its resources for their own utilization, uses, and benefits. Because of this, a conflict arises between man and nature, which results in nature, including the trees, that are not happy and in fact disappointed and sad with regard to the extensive nature of the ruthless human activities which don't seem to have an end. The poem mainly talks about decorative plants which we keep in our homes. Human beings have confined nature within their four walls. We have uprooted trees from nature to keep them in artificial glass houses. Because of human construction and the extensive usage of natural resources for human development activities like road building, construction of houses, etc., there is not a lot of expanse and space in and around the places we live and our houses where we can see a lot of greenery, trees, or plants. So, what has ended up happening is that people have now started to put plants within the four walls of their home. But this has happened only after they have uprooted and extracted those trees from the nature and keep them in the artificial glass house. The trees are actually metaphors for people, especially females who have been confined by society's rules and who are now ready for their true purposes. So, over here, we can compare the dual meaning that the poem has for us, not just with regard to the kind of human developmental activities has rendered on the nature being ripped off from its natural resources and habitats, but also refers to a very humanistic understanding of it, wherein there are certain populations which are discriminated and disadvantaged. Here it is the females and the women who have been confined, caged, and restricted by society's rules and regulations and are now ready for their true purpose and meaning of life after they are let allowed to move out into the world and do whatever they feel on their own and to make the world a better place for them as well as the whole world. There are certain key terms that we need to look into in order to truly understand what we have done so far. To disengage themselves, to separate themselves, strain, which means to make efforts to move. You can look at the illustrations on the slide to know more. Bow, which is a branch. Shuffling is called as moving repeatedly from one position to another. Leashing, crusty patches or bushy growth on tree trunks, bare ground that are formed by association of fungus and algae. Let's now look into certain questions. Before we move on to discuss and answer these questions, let's take a moment and think about them. So, the answer to this question could be that the three things that cannot happen in a treeless forest are the sitting of a bird on trees, the hiding of insects, and the sun burying its feet in the shadow of the forest. Let's now look into the second question. Where are the trees in the poem? What do their roots, their leaves, and their twigs do? So the answer for this question could be in the poem, the trees are trapped in the poet's house. Their roots work all night to disengage themselves from the cracks in the veranda floor. The leaves try very hard to move towards the glass and put a lot of pressure on it so that it breaks, while the small twigs get stiff with exertion. Question number 3 is that how does the poet describe the moon? A. At the beginning of the third stanza and B. At its end. What causes this change? To answer this question, we can see how at the beginning of the third stanza, the poet says that the full moon is shining in the open sky in the fresh night. At the end of the stanza, she describes that the moon breaks into pieces like a broken mirror and shines on the heads of the tallest oak trees. As the trees move outside, they cover some of the shine of the moon and it can be seen only in parts. This is why it seems that the moon has broken into pieces. Let's now look into some quick revision for what we have learned so far. The poet talks about how decorative plants are confined within four walls rather than being in nature where they are meant to be. She hopes for the day that all these trees will be back in the wild again. The trees could also be a metaphor for people, especially women, who need to be set free so that they can be truly themselves. That's all for now. I hope that the message as well as the understanding of this chapter has gone across in a nice, comprehensive, and learned manner.